So it's nice to have a chance to talk about grad school, and I thought I would talk a little bit about kind of my career journey and talk about some of my experiences in grad school and beyond as we go through this. And so I grew up in Vancouver. I grew up sort of near Douglas Park, if any of you know where that is. And and I loved living in Vancouver all the way through undergraduate years. And I thought I always had in the back of my mind that at some point I would kind of come back home, even if I went somewhere else. And you often do have to go somewhere else if you're going to go to grad school. And so I went to UBC for undergraduate. It didn't look like this back then. This is a much more modern picture of the way it looked, and it looks now. And so I had got my undergraduate degree in psychology. And along the way, somewhere along the way, I kind of got my mind focused on the idea that I wanted to be a practicing psychologist in the future. And so I realized I had to get into graduate school, and my choice was to try and pursue clinical psychology grad school. And so I kind of got my act together right around third or fourth year, started to volunteer in people's research labs and get to know professors who could advise me on what to do and how to deal with applying to graduate school and that type of thing. I wouldn't say that I fully had my act together by the time I applied to grad school, but I applied and I got in to a few places. And I decided that the best fit was for me to go to Idaho State University. And this is my little trip from Vancouver all the way down to southeastern Idaho, which honestly was a place I never thought I was going to visit in my life. And but once I got there, it was a really good fit for me. I got to work with somebody who was an expert in personality disorders and personality research. And that was really what I was interested in at the time. If for those of you who know a little bit about clinical psychology grad school, you kind of start off in your first year taking courses and then developing your thesis. And around your second year, you usually start seeing clients and getting some clinical experience. And so I was doing some of my initial research on personality and psychopathy. And it just so happens that up in the hills that you see in that photo, there was a women's prison. And so we went up and did our research in the women's prison and on some of the personality traits that are related to being impulsive, and which of course is very relevant to people who end up in prison, because oftentimes it's impulsive behavior that gets you into prison. But at the very same time, I was first starting to get some clinical experience, and I was seeing clients, and I was lucky enough to be supervised by somebody with expertise in personality disorders. And so I got to see harder clients than you normally do when you first start off as a grad student. And I was sort of just starting to learn how to do the treatments while I was helping these clients. So we were all kind of learning the treatment at once at the same time. And the people I was seeing, a couple of the people I was seeing were considered like too difficult to treat and had borderline personality disorder and that type of thing. But I noticed that even despite that, they made a lot of progress, started doing more fulfilling things with their lives, moved away from some of the more risky behaviors they were doing, like suicidal behavior and self-harm and that type of thing. And that inspired me to kind of make that the focus of my career. So I switched gears a little bit, still did my research in the women's prison, but my focus was more on borderline personality disorder and how we can best understand and treat it. So then I decided, all right, I'm going to go across the country to Duke University Medical Center for my internship, where they had a really good training program in treatments for complex clients, which is what I was really interested in. And so I spent a year there on internship. In clinical psychology grad school, you have to go on internship before you get your PhD. And I should say, just backtracking a little bit, one of the things that I realized maybe about halfway through grad school was that I really loved being in grad school. And one of the things I loved about it was the fact that you could do a little bit of everything. So you could see clients, you could do research, you could even get experience teaching. And I pretty much loved everything I was doing, and I wanted to sort of continue to do it. And so I realized that my target was that I wanted to eventually become a professor as my career goal. So I went to Duke University Medical Center for my internship. After that, I traveled all the way across the country again to Seattle, where I did a postdoc for 2 years with Dr. Marcia Linehan, who developed an effective treatment for borderline personality disorder. And at that point, toward the end of the postdoc, my wife was pregnant. We were thinking we like being close to family, so we're either going to stay in Seattle or we're going to move back home somehow. And it just so happened that a job popped up at SFU that year, and it was the only job I applied to. So I was lucky enough to get it and be able to come back home and do everything that I continue to love doing. So this was the shorter journey compared to the other cross-continent journeys, and was very happy to land back home at SFU. And of course, my kids, when they were younger, loved coming up to campus and running around and doing all sorts of stuff. I should say, they're absolutely nowhere near as cute as they were back then, because they're now teenagers. And so here are a few key tips that I wanted to include before I finish off. So one is start early in your planning for grad school related stuff. So I started kind of late, and then I was lucky. But I would suggest you start really early if you think there might be a chance that you want to get into grad school, particularly in clinical, but in grad school, it's just hard to get into no matter what area you're getting into. Try to get connected with people who can advise you and give you really good advice about your career. Get experience volunteering in research labs and get really solid mentoring. Sometimes we have excellent students who apply, but it's clear that they haven't really had much guidance on how to apply. And so I would suggest that you try and pursue that and get connected with people who can not only guide you, but give you a good sense of the research process. Don't let things slide. So don't decide, all right, forget it. This semester is sort of far gone already, and it's okay if I get a few bad grades here and there. It's sort of okay, but it's also sort of not okay, because you really actually have to have a very high GPA to get into grad school these days. So try your best not to let things slide, as it's easy to do as an undergrad. Follow your passion. So find something that you really want to work on for a long time, that gives you energy and that you find really meaningful. And I would say that's probably one of the most important things. And then finally, remember that there are many roads to Rome. So in clinical psychology, if you want, you can get a degree in clinical psychology and you can become a practicing psychologist, but you can also get a degree in social work or counseling or other mental health fields and do similar work. And so, clinical psychology is not the only road to Rome, but it's my favorite road to Rome, in the sense that oftentimes in a career in clinical, you can do such a huge variety of fascinating and interesting and meaningful things. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Chapman. That was great. Love your tips, especially to start early. So now moving on to the second speaker, we have Dr. Marlene Moretti. So just heading off over to you.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And that was really fascinating, Alex. I wasn't aware of all of your journeys, but I'm glad that they brought you back to SFU to be with us. I don't have any slides, but it's been interesting to kind of reflect on how I came to SFU over the course of my career. I was not born in Vancouver. I was born in a small town of Timmins, Ontario, which is in the north. And then I grew up in an Italian immigrant town in southern Ontario. And I went to university as an undergraduate at a small university called Brock University, which didn't have a graduate program. So actually, I didn't really know how people became professors. That became something of an exploration for us. But one of the opportunities I had as an undergraduate was to be a teaching assistant, to be a research assistant. I loved it. I loved it greatly. And finally, I went to one of my professors and I said, how do you get to do what you do? What are the steps to that? And they told me all about graduate school. That was a long time ago. There were not many clinical programs in Canada, but I applied to several programs. I applied both not just in clinical, because I was actually very interested in cognitive psychology and neuropsychology, but I applied broadly. And, I guess I wish I could say, as Alex has talked about, start early and be planful, but for me, it was a little bit different. It was a bit of a journey to try to discover what really I was interested in. And as much as there is a press to really make a decision early and lock in and be prepared, I really encourage all of you in these really incredibly important years of your life to explore. Take that time as an undergraduate to kind of maybe take some different courses to find what your passion is before you really commit. Alex is absolutely right. You need to be on target with your grades while you do that exploration, but it really is important to kind of explore the direction that you want to take before you commit to graduate school. Graduate school will take you into some of the most incredible years of your life. And if you're going into clinical psychology, they will be quite a few numbers of years, at least 6 years in total. So it's a big commitment. Know that if you want to do a clinical degree, that's actually something that involves a lot of research, a lot of study. And if you want to go into doing clinical work through counseling or social work, that's equally important, but it doesn't require a PhD in clinical psychology. So, just in those ways, I can't say that I was aware of that as I was applying to graduate school. It was more kind of by going for what I was interested in and really the kindness and fortune of finding wonderful opportunities. So I actually went from Brock University to Simon Fraser University in the early days where I did my master's and my PhD. I worked with a social psychologist named Dale Miller, who's at Stanford. And it was a wonderful period of time. One of the things I would say about graduate school is make it your own. Don't wait for someone to figure it out for you. Look for opportunities. Look for those opportunities in the other faculty's research. Look for collaborations. Look for them in the community. I was really fortunate to get involved with the Vancouver General Hospital, and I was very interested in adolescence. I have been for a very long time. And I was able to work with the Department of Psychiatry there with Keith Marriage and Stuart Fine on some of the early research on child and adolescent depression. And that was amazing for me to be able to do that work. We published several studies at that time. Separately from that, I did my doctoral work on self and other referent information process and a social cognition kind of paradigm. So it's really interested in the intersection between clinical problems and also how people think, how they feel, and the importance of self-development and self-representation. In that process of exploring that, I ended up getting involved in very experimental research using tehistoscopic, you probably don't even know what that is, brief exposures of emotion phases, and it was like a long study. But all of that involved not only research at Simon Fraser University, but also continuing my research when I went to CAMH in Toronto for my doctoral clinical work there. And I got connected with York University where I collected more data, and I continued on to collect data after that in terms of depressed clients and remitted depressed clients, and to be able to kind of pull this all together. In that process, I came to know a really wonderful professor who's now at Columbia University, but was at NYU, and I ended up doing a postdoctoral fellowship there with Tori Higgins. And I continued to do work, again, on this kind of idea of how do we understand information from a self perspective or from the perspective of another, that kind of reflective kind of capacity. And we were able to do some really interesting theoretical and research work on that. And soon after that, I was hired at the University of Waterloo as an assistant professor, and I continued my work on developmental psychopathology, continued my work on this kind of idea of social cognition and self and other reference and so on, was able to work with just an amazing department of psychologists there, many who are older and have retired at this point, but it was an incredibly wonderful opportunity. And then finally, I came back to Simon Fraser University because, quite frankly, I realized that having lived in Vancouver as a graduate student, boy, I really wanted to come back, and there was an opportunity to do that. And I'm so happy that I was able to do that work. And so that was kind of my journey through graduate school. But what's most distinctive about it, and I think that, there's a really important paper that was written, and maybe Tim, you might remember the name of this person who wrote it. It might have been Bandura, actually, who wrote The Psychology of Chance Encounters, and that it's really important to keep in mind all the interactions you're going to have along the way, and to see doors that you may not have seen before and open those doors and walk through them. So as you're preparing to think about graduate school and your graduate application, I'd encourage you strongly to take this into your own hands, to be self-directed, to explore and go talk to faculty, to get involved in research in the department as much as you can, and to really ask yourself hard questions. Those hard questions will be something like, is this really going to be a fit for me over the long course? And why am I doing this? Am I doing this because this is something I want to pursue, or because I have an idea that I need to get this graduate degree in some way? And if it is that this is something that you really want to pursue, that's going to be important in your life, then give it your all and have intention and have focus. When you get into graduate school, make sure that you stay on top of it, as Alex said. And there's a few things that matter here. I'm a big believer in make everything count, but make it count not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but if you can do it 4 times, get cohesion, get focus, and really start to build your career as you go forward. When you look in terms of applications, look broadly, look at people's research programs. But when you get there, when you get accepted, be open to learning. You do not need to know everything that you're going to do in graduate school before you get there. And sometimes some of our applications, people will outline very narrow kind of research focus. And to be perfectly honest, there needs to be some flexibility, because what possibly could you learn if you know it all and you've got your dissertation already mapped out? So be open, be flexible. Anything else that I might want to say about it? I guess here's the thing. In graduate school, you will have the best and most lasting friendships that you'll ever make. It's kind of like, it's fabulous. However, it's kind of like going to war, I would say. You're in a high pressure situation. It is demanding. You do bond with each other. And so that's a wonderful experience. So that brings a lot of opportunities, but be careful that others' experiences of graduate school are not something that you just accept as your own. You'll make it your own, and you'll carve your own way. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you. It's so wonderful where you are in your career, and I wish you the best as you go forward.
Thank you so much, Marlene. That was such great advice. I really liked what you said about carving your own path, and also to, be open to opportunities. So thank you, Marlene, for that. We will now head on to the third speaker of the night, Dr. Tim Racine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good to be here. And thanks for inviting me to take part in this, Emily. It's something I've sort of done in different sorts of ways over the years, because I've been involved in our honors program here in the department for, well, I guess probably about 10 years in various ways. And I stopped doing those sorts of things a couple of years ago. So this is coming home for me in a lot of ways. And I have quite a bit of knowledge of that part of how our department functions if people want to tap into it in the Q&A. I'm also currently at least the acting chair of our graduate program. I'm stepping in for the year to replace the more able Kate Slaney, as I'm finding out. And it's an interesting thing, because one of the things I do in this role is graduate admissions. And we, see intimately on the graduate studies committee how these things are tied up, and what the sorts of practical things most people have when they apply, how scholarships play into it. And it's a fairly complicated web of things, some of which you have a lot of control over, and a lot of which you sort of don't, which I think speaks to points we've already heard made by the other 2 speakers. So I, as was introduced at the beginning, am a faculty member in the HQT research area, history, quantitative, and theoretical psychology. And the part of the take-home message today has been follow your journey and your passion. You don't quite know what life has in hold for you. Well, I wouldn't have predicted I would have been here today, in a number of reasons. First of all, I was trained as a developmental psychologist. I got a degree in developmental psychology, my PhD here at SFU, quite a while ago at this point, I did my PhD with someone named Jeremy Carpendale, which a few of you probably know. Jeremy is in our department now. I was his first graduate student. I had done my master's, though, before that, also at SFU with someone named Dennis Krebs, who retired about 15 years ago. And Dennis, his research program was looking mostly at moral development from an evolutionary point of view. So one of the things I've slowly transitioned towards in my journey through development and looking at developmental issues is a strong interest in evolutionary theory. And I've come back to that a lot, and that actually constitutes a lot of my research focus these days and the things I tend to write about. So yeah, it's funny, I wouldn't have predicted that. And how did I wind up here? Well, through a lot of, I think also things I wouldn't have necessarily predicted. So I, like Dr. Moretti, was an undergraduate in Ontario. I was at Wilfrid Laurier University. I was enjoying it and taking a lot of different courses, but I took a break. I took a leave for a little while. Ultimately, I moved out to Vancouver to pursue various things. And while I was here, I decided I wanted to finish off my degree. It wasn't like I went to graduate school or through the process. I mean, I ended up doing that, but my reason to finish off my undergraduate degree was mostly out of curiosity. And in so doing, I took a course with someone named Dennis Krebs, and I heard about volunteering in research labs. And I asked if I could work in his lab. And a year after that, I was coding the PhD dissertation of someone named Russell Day, who a few of you would probably know from the department. So life is funny. I ended up choosing to apply to Simon Fraser because my spouse has a small business in town, and ultimately we ended up having small children during my graduate degrees as well. And that was, something I wouldn't recommend, just doing your degrees at one place, but that is how it worked out in my case. And once I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a faculty position at the University of Manitoba. I was there for a few years, and then I was hired here at SFU as a developmental psychologist, which is still shocking to Marlene, but what are we going to do about that? But in any event, life plays out the way that it does, and you can't always predict a lot of the things that will happen. In terms of practical things, though, I think those things are really important, and part of what Marlene and Alex have talked about is keeping your eye on the ball with these things. Obviously, grades and those sorts of things are in our control, but when I landed out in Dr. Krebs's lab as a research assistant, I found out all sorts of things about how that stuff works. And I ended up getting invited to be part of a small publication with Dr. Krebs and a graduate student concerning the evolution of self-deception. I mean, who knew? So I ended up publishing this article, ended up getting my name on a lab paper out of the same lab. And those sorts of instrumental acts, being involved in research, and the importance of understanding the value and currency of publications is something that is very important in your graduate training, as you'll find out when you get there. It was something I was already lucky enough to be involved in as an undergrad. Not everyone is, but I think it was decisive in getting me accepted to the program here, and also in getting me my first Shirk doctoral scholarship ultimately, which then set me up for a postdoctoral scholarship, which ended up declining because I got a faculty position. I continued having, very involved in Dr. Carpendale's lab, publishing a lot of lab-related research, a couple of my own things, and those things are very important, and instrumental acts as a graduate student, as an undergrad, are very important too. So that's really my quick journey, and my tips are non-existent. They're, we can tell our life story in all sorts of different ways that attributes all sorts of agency and goals and plans to what we do. And of course, there's some of that in my life, or I wouldn't be here today, but there's other ways of telling the story too. And I look back at my life now and go, well, I'm happy I'm here. I'm glad I got here, but I couldn't begin to tell you some days how I got here. So in any event, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for being here. I look forward to the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Racine. That was great. So now we will head on to, for our graduate students, first up is Tierra Cash. So feel free to take it away, Tiara.
Okay, so again, my name is Tierra Cash, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a graduate student in social psychology in the experimental track at SFU. I'm a Black woman from the States with Indigenous heritage, and I think that grounding myself in this cultural background as part of my introduction is always important, because it really helps me to understand the context in which I research, the lenses in which I see the world, and my experiences as a graduate student. So I always like to ground with that ethnic and heritage. I'm currently working in the Helping and Happiness Lab under the direction of Dr. Lara Ackman. And my studies broadly focus on understanding the intersection of challenging life transitions and the possibilities of pro-social behaviors to mitigate stress and to support well-being during those life transitions. Previously, I worked as a staff and practitioner at Arizona State University for the last 6 years. And I worked in both academic support and at the College of Nursing and Health Innovation and the Center for Mindfulness. And there, I supported programming, I wrote curriculum, and conducted research on this novel framework called Equitable Mindfulness, which helps to break down inclusive barriers to practice in higher education. And actually, my motivation for coming back to university and studying psychology came from that work, the work that I was doing at the Center for Mindfulness, when I realized that I really wanted to expand my knowledge on the connections between circumstances that cause stress and challenge, and then how to practically enhance a person's well-being while also acknowledging the truths of those challenges. So after doing a bit of personal research, I came across Dr. Ackman's focus areas and the Helping and Happiness Lab, and I was deeply interested in bridging the gap between pro-sociality, stress, and well-being. And ultimately, I'd like to use these findings and learnings that I'm getting here from SFU to become a scholar practitioner and to continue doing research in the field while leading some sort of center that creates programming around enhancing well-being through mindfulness, pro-sociality, and with a lens on equity, inclusion, and solidarity. You could probably see for a short while I had that slide up, that this is my second time around being a graduate student. And to be quite honest, my first time was very challenging. And actually, one of the reasons why I chose to focus on the research that I'm doing now gave me a bit of me search to grow from. However, so far, my experiences here at SFU have been really fulfilling. I'm only in my second year here, and I've already been leading about 6 projects in the lab. I have my first paper in the lab that is, I feel like I'm learning and growing along with the curriculum that's being presented, and it really means a lot to me here. And I just wanted to end my introduction by giving a couple of what I hope to be wholesome tips to students looking for graduate school in psychology. I know that we'll have a chance to answer a lot more questions and tailor advice to whatever you're hoping to learn process. The first being that you're not a number. You're not a statistic. And no matter what happens with it, this is only one part of your life journey. Yes, it is an important part, but you're bigger than this one part. So while we're here today, we're here to give you tips and to answer questions on graduate school. My hope is that the biggest thing that you learn and you take with you is that you're all worthy, and that it's just a matter of moving through these processes to get you where you need to be in life, and which I think we've already heard from our esteemed professors as well. The second thing is that my perspective as a graduate student, picking your supervisor is one of the most, if not the most important part of the application process. I've had students ask me, well, if I got into school that I want to, then won't the university just put me with a supervisor? And is that okay? And I think the more important question here is, what are you going to graduate school for? The degree or the experience? If it's the experience, then having someone in your corner to help shepherd you through this academic process is more important than the name on your degree. So you can get the name really anywhere, but I think the supervisor has a lot more weight and power to help shepherd you through all the experiences that you'll be needing to get. SFU has a lot of great supervisors as well that can help in that process. But make sure you do your research and contact potential supervisors even before beginning your process with applications. And I would say that should start the summer before submitting your applications. So the summer that you're thinking about going in, you're thinking about applying for grad school, start to look for those potential supervisors and see who you'd like to be matched with. So that's me, that's my background, and a little bit about grad school from my perspective. I apologize about the technical difficulties, but I'm really looking forward to having more conversation with you all and learning more about you as well during this process.
Great, thank you so much, Tiara. Love those wholesome tips, especially, about being worthy. I think having imposter syndrome is really common in grad school. So keep that in mind. You are worthy and you deserve to be there. So thanks again, Tiara, for that great presentation. So next we have just the very last speaker before we head on to the Q&A. So last but not least, we have Madison Edge Almond. So feel free to take it away, Madison.
So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us virtually this afternoon. And I am Madison, like Emily said. I am just starting my second year in the forensic track of the clinical program, the clinical psychology program here at SFU. So starting with my academic journey just thus far, I actually completed my undergraduate degree at SFU as well. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts with honors in psychology and a certificate in legal studies in place of a minor. It just worked out that way. I always tell undergraduate students interested in psychology and especially in forensics that SFU is a fantastic place to complete your undergrad. If you're thinking about going on to grad school, especially, there's just so many opportunities to gain hands-on experience in research labs to prepare you for the next step, and with programs like the honors, the directed studies, research experience, course credit, etc. Personally, I volunteered as an RA with Dr. Steve Hart in the Mental Health Law and Policy Institute during my undergrad, which was who I completed my honors thesis project with. And also I worked with Dr. Fillion in the Adolescent Risk and Resilience Lab. I was one of those lucky people who always had a sense that I wanted to do something related to psychology and criminal behavior. So I actually started volunteering quite early in my second year of undergrad. Then after graduating in 2019, I took a gap year to work as a research coordinator at the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital in Coquitlam and Colony Farms, just down the road from SFU, just to gain even more research experience. And then I was accepted into the clinical psychology program in early 2020 and started my master's degree later that year. I am currently now working with Dr. Kevin Douglas in the Douglas Research Lab. And I'm also currently on a junior practice and placement with Back in Motion, where I conduct psychovocational assessments, big word, for individuals seeking to return to work. So why did I choose to apply to clinical psychology programs specifically? So my ultimate reason is quite tied into why I've chosen the more specific area of clinical forensic psychology. And basically, I just love the dual ability that clinical forensic psychologists and clinical psychologists as a whole have to make a tangible difference in the lives of their clients by helping them get back on track and just live more pro-social, fulfilled lives. And also the difference that we, in particular, as forensic psychologists, try to make in psychology by providing treatment to those who may be at risk to reoffend in the future. I also really appreciate the highly flexible career options that clinical psychologists have that Dr. Chapman, Dr. Moretti just touched on as well. Because after you graduate with your PhD, you can choose to become a practicing clinician, a researcher, an academic, but many clinical psychologists choose to become some mix of two of those or even all three of those. So the options are just really flexible, which is great. And in the year of grad school that I've been through thus far, one of the biggest challenges I've faced is balancing all of the responsibilities that clinical grad students have, which has also been touched on. It's a very busy time. You have a pretty heavy course load. You're trying to get research up off the ground. You're engaging in clinical work via practicum for the very first time, which is incredibly daunting. And you're also often TAing, teacher assisting as well. So I've found that learning too is more hands-on in graduate school than it was in undergrad. And what I mean by that is that we definitely still have seminars where we have theoretical discussions about concepts, but our coursework also incorporates things like clinical role plays, practice report writing, and of course, all your learning while you're at practicum is experiential too. There's also lots of self-direction required in graduate school, as no one's looking over your shoulder telling you what to do, which is daunting somewhat. And it's also, as Dr. Moretti said, it's so important to build bonds with your cohort. I've found this to be one of the most fulfilling aspects thus far. These are the people that are going through this very unique experience right along with you, and they truly become one of your main support systems. And I know I've highlighted lots of the difficult parts of grad school right now, and it is difficult, but ultimately it's also been the most fulfilling experience I've had in my life thus far. And I do feel like I'm developing my knowledge of my field and my professional identity more each day, which is a really neat feeling. Okay, so lastly, I wanted to split my tips section, like others have done, kind of into applying to grad school and then being in grad school, as I imagine that many of you that are here are in the process of applying or maybe haven't applied yet and are considering whether you'd like to apply or not. So if you are ready to take the plunge and apply to grad school in clinical psych or another area of psychology, make sure, as it's been stressed, to just take the time to explore potential supervisors that are out there at the various programs, and ultimately apply to work with a supervisor or multiple supervisors whose research interests just align well with yours. And graduate applications are a lot of work just in and of themselves, with each school requiring multiple components like transcripts, personal statements, sometimes even test scores, although that's less common now. So be organized, start preparing months in advance, because there are so many moving pieces that you really can't throw together in the last 2 weeks before the application deadline. And also remember that if you don't get in the first time, there is always next year. So clinical psychology programs actually have some of the lowest acceptance rates out of any type of graduate program ever. And I actually applied twice and I didn't get in the first time. So there is still hope. You shouldn't just throw in the towel if you don't get in once. And then when you're in graduate school, one piece of advice that I've received from senior students is to take all the interesting opportunities that you have time for and never miss a chance to connect with others in your field. However, I also want to caveat that because your time is precious in grad school. So be intentional about the opportunities you take. You don't have time for everything, and make sure the opportunities that you do take will benefit your training and development in some way. And don't just say yes to absolutely everything. This was something I struggled with. I still somewhat struggle with it. And it is also great to get involved with research and take all the presenting and publishing opportunities that you can earlier on in your graduate program, as this will then strengthen your CV and make you more competitive for awards and other types of funding later on. And very lastly, I just wanted to end with saying that imposter syndrome is completely natural. I feel it all the time, and I cope with it by reminding myself that everyone is always learning something. And I've heard from professionals and from professors and other students who are more senior in the program that it's not something that goes away. Instead, it's just something that you get more comfortable with, just coping with those feelings of uncertainty. So yeah, that's everything I have, and I am looking forward to hearing the questions as well.